All right, everyone, thank you all for coming out tonight. I guess folks are still kind of coming in, mingling a bit, so I'd like to take a little care of a little housekeeping up front. I'd like to start off by thanking ASUM for helping sponsor this, and when I say ASUM, I mean Brandon Bart, who pretty much, well, they're pretty much paying for everything, so thank you, ASUM. I'd like to very much thank MontPIRG, especially Daniel Whelan, my director, and Katie Westhoff, the campus coordinator, for letting me come up and try to answer some questions that have been bothering me. I would also like to thank some of our interns. There are so many wonderful interns. I'm not sure if we attract such great interns because it's such a wonderful organization, or if we have such a great organization because we attract such wonderful interns. So anyway, I would like to I'd like to point out Margaret's not here, but if she was here, I would be thanking her profusely for all of her work. I want to thank Gus Pulaski. Thank you so much for all of his help. And also Chase Greenfield, who's around here. Oh, there he is. Hi, Chase. Thank you. Working as ever. So, for those of you who don't know what MontPIRG is the student-directed, funded, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to effecting tangible, positive change through education and empowerment of the next generation of civic leaders. Okay, so what that means is that when oh, I guess I should introduce myself. My name's Brian, in case I didn't know. My name's Brian Davis. I'm a freshman over at Missoula College studying renewable energy. And these guys were so great that they would allow me to come and kind of outline this forum to answer questions that I had. And of course, I will open it up to audience as well. But ultimately, this forum was just kind of a nifty way for me to answer some questions that have been bothering me. So anyway, thank you, MontPIRG. Thank you, ASUM. Thank you, all my wonderful interns. Oh, and by the way, I'm also an intern. So I'm just not nameless, apparently, tonight. Okay, and some of the issues that MontPIRG likes to address are environmental promotion and health, affordable tuition, consumer protection, clean and fair elections, privacy, online privacy. We just had a forum last week. So MontPIRG does some really wonderful work that really affects a lot of people. So if it's at all possible, keep up your support. Okay, so tonight I'd just kind of like to outline the way I would like to see the forum going. What I would hopefully do is start off with some set questions that I have, and then I will open up to audience questions, and then with a few remaining minutes, I'll invite the audience to come up and just chat with the panel. And so that's the way I'd like to do the forum. What I'd like to start with is some global questions, and then kind of move it to some local perspective, and then finally some individual options. And the title of our forum is What's Wrong with Green, first of all, and second of all, how do we fix it? And so those are the questions that we want to ask. I want to come away from this forum with some action plans, if at all possible. Some things that we can be doing individually and as groups to try to facilitate tangible change. Okay? So now, on to our panel. I could probably spend the rest of this forum just introducing the panel, which is one of the reasons we printed up these nifty little flyers, because it's got the full biographies in there. Please take a minute and read those. Again, I could, when I was seating this panel, and the other folks that I talked to heard this was the panel that I was seating, I had phone calls from everybody wanting to get on the panel. And I had to tell them, no, I'm sorry. I had to cut it off somewhere. So I got a box of dirt for Earth Day, stuff like that. But no, I had to cut it off. So this is the panel that we're with. Over here we have Dr. Robin Saha from Environmental Studies, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And
you want me to read it?
it's
No, please.
No.
okay. Here we have Dr. Suzanne Tillman from Resource Management?
Business school.
Business school, but
Yeah,
specialties, okay.
Specialties are firm creation and firm performance in response to environmental sustainability pressures.
Okay, that's, okay.
Pleasure's here.
Chris Olson is the Campus Sustainability Coordinator.
ASUM.
ASUM, okay, thank you. And Dr. Jill Belsky from the College of Forestry and Conservation. Yes, this is our panel. Can we give them a warm welcome? Okay, so what I'd like to do is start off with just kind of the first question I'd like to ask is, what is the definition of sustainability and what mechanisms are involved? So sometimes when we talk about sustainability, I think people get different ideas of what that is. So would you mind starting us off?
Sure, happy to. Thanks again for organizing this and for all the sponsors and people that helped. Really appreciate it. I think it's a great topic to be covering and talking about, and I'm not sure I know how to fix it, but I think we all collectively have some things to say and can feed off of each other's ideas, and I really look forward to kind of hearing what's on your minds too, and what specific local issues matter to you, and how we might kind of workshop those today as we go along. And at least for me, sustainability, there's these formal definitions, and I'm not lecturing tonight, so I just want to put that out there. I sat down and I thought, okay, what is sustainability? And the first thing that popped in my mind is that it doesn't really exist. And that's sort of a provocative statement. And by that I mean, I think it's an ideal. I think it's a vision. We're obviously not there, otherwise we wouldn't be having this forum. So let's just call it a vision or an ideal. This is just my musing. Okay, there's going to be other definitions we're going to hear in a minute. Someday it will become a reality, hopefully sooner than later. And so, but it's an ideal of having society organized and structured to, this is a word you're going to like, Professor Tillman, is optimize environmental quality and benefits from the environment, inter and intra-generational equity. So equity within society now, but also equity over time, so we're not taking away from what future generations can have and enjoy. And then human well-being, so optimizing human well-being. And some people call that the triple bottom line, and I'm saying human well-being rather than economic well-being. But a lot of people would define sustainability as having an economic system that can provide for people's needs. And so, but I don't know that all people's needs are met by the economy. They're met in many other ways. So I'm sort of broadening and saying well-being, environmental benefits, and equity.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Tillman.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you for the invitation.
Yes. Thank you for coming.
Thanks to the students who care about issues. Whether or not you find the reflection or the shaping of your issue in whichever class or school you go to, the fact that you bring them makes it a better school and makes us better faculty. So thank you for bringing so much. I define sustainability very closely to the Brandtland's Commission on Sustainable Growth, which is meeting the needs of today's generation without impairing the well-being of future generations. Very short. The difficulty is that needs can mean so many things, right? If you're sitting in a business school and you're thinking very traditionally about economics, you might think it is an economic need. But I agree with you that it does not have to mean, economic equity or, because sometimes those with the most economic wealth actually have the least well-being, as we can see in our health indexes and happiness indexes in different countries in the world. So I like leaving that needs open for discussion with my students, because we really have to talk about the intersection of business and social and environmental implications. The mechanisms involved, that's the second question. I had to guess at what you meant by mechanisms, so just, you steer me back if I'm completely off. But the challenge with sustainability is that we don't have one governing body, we don't have one paradigm that brings the whole world together that helps us to promote environmental sustainability or attack the tragedy of the commons. So I like to think about it in 3 or 4 layers, and I don't have a way to interconnect them very well. But the first is the political sphere. The fact that the global environment is a commons that every country contributes to or draws from. If we don't have a united political sphere or successful Kyoto Accords, we have to tackle it on a political sphere. We have to tackle it on a social sphere where we have to care about other human beings across geographic boundaries and across color lines and religious lines, and so we don't have one. I'm not saying I'm necessarily promoting religion, but we don't have one religion that governs the majority of our world, so that we can appeal to the morality of that. So somehow we have to then link in the social or morality implications. And then the third is technology and innovation. And that is often driven by economic rewards, not all the time, but to link those who are able to come up with technological innovations with the goals that would improve environmental sustainability. And then finally, the fourth, which I still haven't quite figured out, is the business. I mean, we know about mission-driven companies that seek social or environmental impact, but that's not the norm, that's the exception. And so how do we then link economic incentives to environmental sustainability efforts?
Thank you. Chris Olson?
So I think often when we're asked to define sustainability, we always fall back on those diagrams they give us, like the 3-legged stool or the 3 overlapping circles of environment, economy, and society. And so whenever I try to define sustainability, I often get in trouble because I always give examples instead. I don't really have a hard or dry, this is what sustainability is, but I know it when I see it. And for me, I like to give a more expansive idea of what sustainability is. It's more than just environment, economy, and society. There's also this fourth piece that I think we overlook a lot of times, and that's culture. So we have our environment, our place, our natural resources, and that shapes the culture that we develop. These cultures that we have shape our societies, and our societies shape our economies. And so when I think of sustainability, I'm often trying to emphasize that cultural aspect. So protecting native languages and native cultures is a key part of sustainability. In terms of economics, it's meeting the needs of the present while maintaining that we do have to maintain the needs of the future as well. In terms of environmental sustainability, I think that's what we all rely on. We all know what environmental sustainability is. It's keeping the oil in the ground, it's protecting forests, it's cleaning up our water supply. So environmental sustainability, I think we all got that. But yeah, culture is one that I try and emphasize a lot in terms of what I think is missing from definitions of sustainability, because I think it often gets muddled with the social aspect or society, but we need to realize that society and culture are two distinct spheres within sustainability.
Perfect. Dr. Belsky?
Well, I want to remind everyone here, first of all, that the whole notion of sustainability comes from a concept of maximum sustained yield. And lots of folks working in the natural resource sector for the last 100 years have, and you know what the most in forestry, right? That the goal has been to sustain a yield, to sustain production, or it can be sustain something else. And this origin, I think we have to remember in the term sustainability because it still assumes something can be managed, can be understood, and maintained at some point, the sweet spot where those charts overlie, where they optimize social, economic, culture, environmental. And I want to just remind everybody that the reason that sustainability has been decoupled from development, because a lot of folks have a hard time with the way development itself has been organized around the world over the last 100 years. So the notion to sustain that type of development, and that's something we can talk about a lot more later, which has been historically in the US and around the world, it's been about a certain type of economic growth. Not really questioning growth. Growth is good. And that in itself is problematic. So to sustain that is an oxymoron. So let's forget about it and we'll decouple them, and that's why we're talking about sustainability. What I also like to just point out in my little time here is there's a lot of advantages to maintaining the sustainability part, and you've heard it, intergenerational equity, concern for the future. But there's a lot of folks right now that have called for the end of sustainability, that by focusing on sustainability and the idea that we can actually identify that is we want to maintain or sustain, let alone be able to do it in a predictable way, is ridiculous. We really need a different organizing concept and a different agenda, and it may be why we can't fix it with a framework of sustainability. And we can be happy to keep talking about that, but one other term that I'm sure you've heard bandied around a lot is the notion of resilience. And there's this, just huge amounts of literature and people and organizations and goofy diagrams with all these feedback loops. But I think it's something we really should be talking about a lot, because the premise of resilience is that the world is too complex now to be understood, predicted. The only thing we can be sure of is uncertainty. Who knows what climate change is going to do, right? And this whole notion of stationarity, that you can maintain anything in equilibrium, let alone that sweet spot right in the middle of all those circles, is ridiculous. And so the idea of resilience is that what you're actually thinking about and managing for is the ability to adapt to change, and adapt to change in a way that doesn't impair the kinds of functions ecologically, socially, because a lot of the conceptualizing of resilience is about interlocked social and ecological systems. But anyway, we can keep talking about that, but just the whole notion that sustainability can actually still be a usable framework is something that I'd like to throw into this conversation as well.
So I'm going off script. So are you saying that sustainability is an ideal that is unachievable or unattainable or unmaintainable?
Well, it's a great vision, just as Robin said. The vision that people can use resources over time and leave them for the future is great. That's a great vision. But the idea that you can manage a forest, fisheries, and some of the best work that has led to calls for the end of the sustainability framework is the notion that you can actually identify some state where you are optimizing culture, social processes, the politics, economics, the business, is just an ideal in this world that we shouldn't try for. What we should try instead is to understand different states that people and different ecosystems are in, and understand that they have thresholds, tipping points. That's why you hear a lot about thresholds and tipping points that can put them into other states that like you're done. So how do you think about those tipping points and thresholds that move systems in ways that enable them to continue to be able to respond, to adapt, to cope, rather than thinking about how to get us to some optimal point and maintain it. So it's a pretty heady theory. I go, that's why I have to go last. But I think it's worth thinking about. And then as you break down resilience, what does it mean to manage for adaptive management? It just raises a bunch of other properties that we could be thinking about at local, global, and cross-scale levels.
I think this is great. Can I comment on that too? I think we need to be resilient and be thinking about how to be resilient. And I wonder if we're just all going to be doomed at the end of the day, though. You know, that we get a little bit more adaptable, but we still don't deal with the fundamental problems of overconsumption and of depletion of resources, of degrading of the productive capacities, and those are all the things that I think we ultimately really care about, and why we're having this conversation is what's the world going to look like in 30 years or 60 years or 100 years or 200 years? And you know, sometimes I sit and I think, my God, what is it, 2015, 16, whatever it is. I guess I don't think a lot about what year it is. But 100 years ago, what was the world like? And it's just phenomenal what has happened in 100 years. And so, you know, a lot of us just know that we can't keep living the way we're living. And so we know we have to do something differently.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, this is what this is about too, and how to make those shifts in society. And so, you know, to me, that overconsumption, you can break it apart: overconsumption, degradation, and somewhere in the mixed population has to get in there, right? And lifestyle, and the technology piece. So, So those are all issues that I think we all want to work on in different ways, and are working on in different ways. And so, you know, it gets kind of big then when you start going down those paths. But
They're the exact path we need to think about.
So adaptation is a component that needs to be in this definition as well. So rather than maintaining something, we need to learn to adapt as well. Is that kind of where I'm getting?
Well, it's what you call adaptation and adapt, it's not just coping with something. It has a lot longer history and understanding. Adaptation means in a social ecological system. And see, now you don't even want to talk about just breaking apart ecology. We understand we live in the Anthropocene where everything has a very strong human component, right? So what is adaptive isn't just coping. It means that the system itself maintains certain properties. And under the kind of things that Robin just talked about, unquestioned growth, that's not adaptive. And then to explain all the reasons why we can do that. So the term adaptive really needs to be unpacked more, because it isn't just mean doing things the old way. It's really understanding how certain population thresholds, types of resource use, destroy the ability of a system to deal with the next change that comes about. And so actually, just to be really a little bit more specific here, a lot of resilient thinkers talk about 3 properties that you never really hear under sustainability, but resilient thinkers are always pushing you to think across scales, and they're saying something like diversity. That always comes up all the time. How does diversity, not just biodiversity, but diversity in livelihood, just as a theme for both biological and social systems, diversity of plants, polycultures rather than monocultures. We know that that's a principle that tends to, when you plant in polycultures, it tends to help the system not rely on single inputs, and it tends to be healthier. And then these are just different principles, and you can have an analogy in the social system. Memory is another one. The memory, when you break apart the memory of an ecological system, there are plant successional pathways, seeds, that can't grow back. When you break away traditional knowledge and people forget how to do things. There's a bunch of different principles that have been talked about, and case studies have been really interesting about what then enables a social ecological system to be able to respond to massive changes without losing its functions. And that's more of the way the arguments go. But what adaptation means, if you just take it in an everyday sense, it doesn't work. And it actually, I'd argue, the more that I read about this, at first I hate, if you read the literature, you're going to go nuts, because there's a lot of terminology, and all these goofy things and systems, and it's theoretical, you go, oh, but the more that you listen to people who use it, it alerts you to the exact things that Robin was telling us to pay attention to. And my big push here is we've now moved into what my colleagues would call a market-centric world. And that's something I want to add to your big list there. Believe me, markets are important, but now markets have become the hegemony of the way that we're supposed to fix everything, make a market for it. And the market will make it work. Well, guess what? Markets don't always signal the kinds of values, concerns, environmental processes that we're talking about right here. So for me, one thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned to talk about the market-centric way. Another fancy term for that is neoliberalism, and how that has become a predominant value system around the world. I think that's very problematic. See, I couldn't promise not to lecture because it doesn't matter. My poor kid at dinner time is like, Mom, this isn't the classroom.
Well, it was not my intention. I was actually trying to narrow the focus down to keep a parameter on the rest of our conversation. But at this point, it looks like we could go anywhere, which is fine. That's just fine. We will go where the wind blows. All right. So now that we've established a definition, albeit somewhat broad, of what sustainability is, I'd like to launch into a handful of questions that Gus and I kind of formulated. Katie, too, thank you. And then from there, we will open up to the audience. Okay, so the first question I have is, what prevents people from getting involved in the green movement? And is there a stigma attached?
Do I get to start?
If you wish, yes.
Okay, I've got like 8 different things, so.
This is completely outside my field.
So I don't know exactly where to start, but I'll start with what I teach about the most, and because I'm a student of, I say this student because we're all learning still of the environmental movement, and I studied it, and I'm also my main area of research is environmental justice, and that concerns the involvement of people of color, low-income populations and communities in environmental issues. And what you find when you start talking to, and this mainly in the U.S., but when you start going into African American communities or Latino communities or other communities, you find out they actually care about what we call environmental issues, but they don't define them as environmental issues. And they don't relate to the word environmentalists. And they don't think of themselves as environmentalists, but they might be taking care of a garden plot. They might be doing a neighborhood cleanup. They might be doing a river cleanup. They might be fighting against a landlord spraying pesticides in their house, or an incinerator in their neighborhood, or car traffic or truck traffic or whatever it might be that's they see as a threat to their health and well-being. And so what I see a big problem as is that there's sort of this is sort of a weird thing to say, but it's almost a segregation within the environmental movement, and that a lot of your average person that works on an oil field in the Bakken, right? Their job is based in fossil fuels. Doesn't mean they don't care about the environment. They may really deeply care about the environment, and yet whatever the way we, and I say we, environmentalists, and I am one, talk about the environment doesn't connect with them. They don't say, they think that the things we care about are going to be hurting their jobs. And they're probably right. Or in people of color communities, they have historically felt that the environmental movement has ignored their issues and has not welcomed them or not been inclusive in involving them in their agenda. And so there's a whole group of people out there that see environmentalism as largely a white middle class movement. And I think we just need to understand that, first of all, and that the types of things that it stands for don't incorporate the values or aspirations or beliefs or concerns that those communities have. or at least don't communicate them in a way that they can relate to. And so we need a bigger tent, and maybe we need to even be thinking about the environmental movement or a green movement as more of a rainbow-colored thing, and recognize too that folks in these communities are working on neighborhood cleanups, on recycling, and all these things, and that they should be considered part of the movement, and yet they don't connect with it. And so there's some disconnect there that we need to be, maybe it's that we too narrowly define what is green, or maybe the word green isn't the word we should be using. And I think we're using it because maybe environmental has alienated people, and I think, and that's true in Montana, and I work in a lot of politics and environmental politics in Montana, and the word environmentalist has become a negative word in Helena, and so people that work on environmental issues we refer to ourselves and others as conservationists. And that, in Montana at least, connects with ranchers, with folks that live off the land. And so it's this weird thing of, well, gosh, terminology, but it counts, it matters. And so how do you connect with people in ways that matter to them and that relate to what concerns them? And I'll just say that this is really important, to understand who your audience is and to understand what they care about, and to translate what you're interested in or what you want to get them to understand in a way that they can relate to. So an example is, Lois Gibbs. You all know her. She's the activist who led the cleanup of Love Canal and started what's now Citizens for Health and Environmental Justice. Was a woman, a housewife, mother who became an activist and ended up on stage with Jimmy Carter when the Superfund law got passed. She talked to her several times, met her several times, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I was fighting this incinerator in wherever the heck it was, and we're trying to get regular people to come out to a public hearing or to get involved. And I was like so tired. It was the end of the day. No one wanted to get involved. I went to this bar and I was having a drink, and this guy next to me was having a drink. He was a truck driver, and she started talking to him, and he's like, "Oh, who are you? What are you doing?" "Oh, yeah, we're here fighting this incinerator." "Oh, I don't care about that." It's like, okay, well, do you care about the roads? "Yeah." "Well, this incinerator was going to bring in like 2,000 trucks a month, or that would be going down the same roads." And he said, "Well, there's all these trucks are going to come in. They're going to be tearing up the roads." And he's like thinking, "Oh, well, gosh, tearing up the roads, that's kind of bad." And that's what he cared about. So she got him all fired up about this issue by connecting with him in a way that he cared about it. Other examples are, and this gets into this issue of social marketing, is how can you take an issue and sell it, if you will, to people in a way that matters to them. So the Chesapeake Bay Foundation was working on how to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. Big issue was urban runoff as well as agricultural runoff. And one of the big problems was people fertilizing their lawns. And you can actually still have a green lawn. We're talking about green, right? If you fertilize in the fall. So the fertilizer has a chance to get into the soil. A lot of people are fertilizing in the spring when the rains come. It's washing off, getting in the sewage system, washing out into the bay, causing eutrophication, killing the ecosystem. So they had this campaign, and it was for the upper middle class people in the Chesapeake Bay area. It was a billboard they had. They had a big house with a big lawn. So they weren't saying don't fertilize, they weren't saying don't have a lawn. They said you can eat crab cakes and have a green lawn. So they were connecting with people's recognition that crab cakes come from the bay. They cared about crab cakes. And the message was, fertilize in the fall. It was what memes are, right? It's a picture, text, and that was just a very simple ad. And so there's just an example of how you can take a message and convert it into something that is going to get people to pay attention and connect it to themselves rather than saying, this is why you should care. You know, we hit people over the head, you should care because of this. And we're right, they should, but they just kind of tune it out, right? So it's just working with people from where they're at. That's my thing.
Okay.
I have other things, but that's enough.
So the second question is what prevents people from getting involved? Did you say this is not?
Did I get that? Maybe I didn't get that. I think that's how you get people
That is,
involved.
that
You know,
is.
is you
To
connect with
connect
them,
with them, you meet them where they're
what they
at,
care
just
about,
basically
and where they're at.
listen.
Yeah.
Well, can I
Yes.
follow up? I think that Robin's saying more than just listen and do a good marketing campaign so that you get their attention. I think what he's saying is if what we're calling a green movement truly doesn't meet people's needs or concerns, they're not going to join. And you have to remember, for a lot of people around the world, because you also did ask, how does money play into this? And I'm not very good at just answering simple questions with one answer, because they're also related, right? But the costs of being part of different campaigns are different for different people. So, for example, just even thinking about the cost of coming to a meeting or being part of the whole participatory movement or the collaborative movement. Well, great, if you are a paid lobbyist from some organization, the costs are very different than if you're a single mom or dad and you're giving up time, you have to pay for a babysitter. So just thinking about the variable costs for different people. And maybe you're going to a part of town you're not familiar with or people you're not concerned with, and maybe they're talking about something that really doesn't concern. And for a lot of folks, I mean, I work with a lot of poor farmers around the world, mostly in upland areas, either here in western Montana, Indonesia, Philippines, Bhutan. And the conservation movement, which by the way, I remind you, and believe me, I do have examples that are outside the forestry sector, but conservation comes from a notion that you can have a wise use of something, hence why it had this greater appeal, that you can use it, but you can use it in a wise way. It fits nicely with sustainability. You have your cake and eat it too. But increasingly, conservation has been hijacked as well. And the whole wise use movement has been hijacked because, so we don't really have a good word, but I say take the words back. I put environment in my course. Take it back. Take back conservation. We can make it just as you say, with good intent. But what I want to point out from my experience, people are very smart at looking below the surface. And that is, if it truly doesn't meet their needs or their concerns and values, they're not going to be. And if it costs. And so a lot of the poor folks that I work with, I mean literally poor in terms of low resource, limited action control over land, they may not be owners, they have been displaced, by the way. Their livelihood is central. So the first thing, no matter what you talk about, is if you're asking a farmer to stop growing a certain crop or to do it in a different way because somebody out in New Jersey has figured out that that's not conserving, though you and your family have been doing this for centuries, and yes, the system is breaking down because of population, because of corporate involvement, it's breaking down. So they're also lost. If you talk to them about what are their concerns, most farmers, most ranchers around here will say the same thing. When the grass isn't growing well, their beef isn't growing well, they're having a problem. A healthy landscape, a healthy ecosystem is good for everyone. But if you don't understand their livelihood costs to be part of something or what you're asking them to give up from some public good, there may be private costs. You have to pay attention to that. Just a couple of other things. Risk. If you're asking very, very poor folks to take a lot of risk. I mean, I like the little metaphor that you always hear about sometimes with Peace Corps, but think about some guy or gal standing on a little rock in the middle of a stream. Any little wave can knock them off. So if people are telling other folks how to change their livelihood so that you can be more green, and you're asking for the possibility for that whole family to be swamped, that's not really appropriate, fair, and smart. They're not going to do it. What's their personal security? And so much of this depends on context. Context, context, context. Back to your points about culture and well-being. Those are very, very specific types of questions. And they're specific across space, different places, and over time, because they change even in one place as well. So you really have to be careful about the seduction of a green movement model. It can look very different in different places. Hence why it is really important, as Robin was saying, is for people themselves to be involved and come up with the kinds of concerns they have. And ultimately, I've never worked any place where concerns about good water, good forestry, or good ecosystem processes, now there's services, but good ecosystem conditions isn't what everybody wants. But the point is, who gets to define what's called green? Who gets to define? I mean, I've had people come and say to me, I don't understand, will you please tell me why these corporations are allowed to come into our place and we get moved? We've been farming here for all these years and generations, and they can come and cut down this beautiful, I work in Sumatra, and this example is because I woke up to NPR the other day, and they'll say, we've been here for generations, but they're cutting down the forest to put up oil palm. We don't eat oil palm. We don't need oil palm. Who's using all this oil palm? And how could this possibly be something that might be more ecological or better or whatever? I mean, constantly I'm being asked all these questions. And all I can say is, oh, don't ask me. But it points to the other issue of power. Who has the power to define what's green? Who's included, who's excluded by those definitions and the practices that go along? And a lot of people have, as Robin has explained, they're excluded.
All right, now, despite my temptation to go off script and ask another question, I will say there's got to be a good question in here from the audience, so I'm going to save that for later. I'll save that one for
Did you have something?
Yeah. You want to dive in?
I was going to echo a lot of what Robin was saying, actually. I think the environmental movement, because of this gap that exists between environmental and environmental justice, the environmental movement has a huge diversity issue. I think it's some 80% of environmental organizations are run by white men, straight white men. And I think that's a huge problem because, as you know, I think it's one of the memes now, representation matters. And people need to see themselves doing this work if we want them to do this work. And so this whole idea that we've created this environmentalist term, it's a rugged individualist who likes to go outdoors and they like camping. It's a very masculine definition of what green means. And I think that's one of the problems with the environmental movement is we've never gone back in time, like in the 1930s, 1940s, when we were coming up with the conservation and preservation movements and gone, yeah, that doesn't work anymore. We can't continue to view it in this way like Theodore Roosevelt.
Read Dorceta Taylor's work on the different types and stages of environmentalism. She basically sets up, while these rich white guys can go away for a month and travel to these places, well, what are the rest of us doing?
Exactly.
But if you open your lens of what's green and environmentalism, all the different things you both have talked about, the park movements, the not just playgrounds, but in health, I mean, many other things fall into it, and she lays it out over the period of American history for us to see. There are multiple environmental movements if we just open our eyes to see them. Diversity, top value of a resilient system, diversity.
And it's what we need.
Yes.
I just mentioned a couple other things too, just at relating to what Dr. Belsky was saying about what people's costs are participating. And so the classic reason for why people don't get involved is a simple rational actor model. It's Manker Olson has this idea of the free rider, that that your investment in an organization to make change, whether it's more sustainable agriculture, clean air, clean water, wildlife protection, conservation, other type of issue, that the amount of energy and time you invest is in that yields, doesn't give you the proportional amount of benefit. It doesn't directly benefit you. So it's the idea that people will just, it's an economic model, people will just sit on the sidelines and hope someone else takes care of the problem because they don't see their investment of time and effort as paying off for them. So it's just a basic cost benefit analysis that people make. So they have to get something else out of participating. Maybe it's social, maybe it's feeling good, maybe it's altruism, some other motivation and some tangible physical change that they're going to benefit from. For a lot of people, that are fighting issues in their community, they do see a benefit coming from that. That's the motivation. The second point is that if you're running an organization, a student group, think about when you go to a meeting, why you want to come back. What is it that got you there? What is it that kept you there? So the thing that we talk about in my environmental citizenship class is if you're having a meeting to get people organized, give them something to do. And I'm sure MontPIRG knows all these tricks and training, but give them something to do where they feel like they can be contributing. So if you feel like you're making a difference, you feel like your role is valued, that there's something for you to do and a way to participate, versus coming to a meeting and just sitting there and listening and going, oh, that was interesting, and just floating off and going, this group isn't, make sure that everyone that comes is welcomed, and that someone in your group who's been around connects with them one-on-one. Have some social time. So that's just sort of a more of a real doing the work piece that I mentioned too.
Excellent. That's a great takeaway.
And I'm sure Chris knows other tricks of the trade from having interns and volunteers. Give them credit, they'll come. Pay them.
Okay, so I'd like to move on to, this question's a little dark, but globally, what role does money play in the global arena?
It's a very big question.
Okay, I guess I'll rephrase.
You came up with this question. What was your motivation for asking the
I
question?
wanted to know really if there is kind of a denial campaign, that there's a problem and we don't really need to address it, and there really is no issue, so we're...
So you're asking, is money tied to a denial campaign?
Yes.
I do firm creation and firm performance, so I can't talk about, larger shadow organizations that fund money for campaigns completely out of my area. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right.
You want to talk about markets? I can talk about markets.
Part of the
If you want to
reason
talk about profit motive, we can talk about profit motive.
Part of the reason I ask this question also is because, there's evidence that there's dark money in our elections and our political processes, and so it seemed to me that it would be a natural stretch to draw that line. I could be going out on a limb, and I probably am, but so there's the question. Does money play a role in a denial campaign?
Do I have a political science class?
And if this question's just too hot,
There's also like green turfing, where they just create an organization that sounds like it's green, you donate to it, and they're actually fighting against green campaigns.
Yeah.
So
I think there might actually be a film at the International Wildlife Film Festival on this subject. I'm not sure, but it's well known that ExxonMobil has been the biggest contributors to some of these AstroTurf organizations that have been giving talking points to Republican congressmen and also to the media to create this sense of that the climate science is under debate. That's been well documented. There's a George Mogiat's written a book called The Denial Industry, or a chapter in one of his books called The Denial Industry. There's a whole bunch of people that have documented this. So that's just specific to climate change, but there's other sort of front groups that have been created to do this work. And there's also, however, completely above board, the conservative think tanks that have brought academics and created a veneer and sometimes actually a legitimate discourse and analyses, economic analyses and others about current policy issues. So you have to kind of sort through, as the public and the media, you kind of have to sort through all of what's good information, what's generated information, false information. It makes it very difficult and confusing for the public and even people who are trying to be well informed. So, but I think Jill's earlier point about the power, how power affects capital and where it goes in the world. There's so much to say about that, and what sort of, for example, industries, energy industries are receive the most investment capital, or now the Asian Pacific agreements being negotiated and in the dark almost, and so this is huge amounts of billions and billions, trillions of dollars that is going to be decided what it gets invested in Asia Pacific, which is part of what economic area that we are in. So absolutely, it's huge, and so there needs to be, you know, some more transparency in how that money is spent, and frankly more ethical standards in how it's used.
Okay, I'm going to let you guys off the hook. Thank you, Doctor, so very much for that one. We're at 8 o'clock. I want to kind of hustle through because I want to give the audience a chance to chime in also. And actually, that segues very nicely into my next question, which is why is there? And this was a little bit more of a softball too, so we'll kind of throw that to the table. Why is there such disparity between groups? Like, for instance, you know, I hate to say left versus right, but I'm just going to put it back there to, you know, just kind of draw those lines. But also, Dr. Saha mentioned briefly environmentalists versus lobbyists. If you say environmentalists versus labor, if you say environmental to certain organizations, they just kind of immediately discard anything else you have to say. So why the disparity? I mean, this should be a nonpartisan issue.
It's so value-laden. Environmentalism, environmental sustainability has a history, right? The Earth Liberation Front, right? That action scared a lot of business people. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have activist environmentalists. I think we have to have people who are not in any way, we're being recorded, supporting actions like ELF. But if we don't have people who are very activist, it doesn't push businesses to work towards environmentalism. So there's some research that shows that because we call them dark green groups in this research, because dark green groups exist, businesses are much more likely to work with light green groups, right? So McDonald's is much more likely to work with World Wildlife Federation because of Greenpeace.
So bad
but,
blood from history?
Yeah, but I do believe that there's value laden. The word is completely value laden, and it has to do with a lot of history. And Chris has heard me say this before. I'm originally from Montana, so I understand a lot of what, you know, kind of much of Montana feels about the term environmentalist.
Mm-hmm.
That has a lot to do with history.
And I think it's important to note that environmental issues used to be nonpartisan.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of these early environmental laws and regulations that we have now had support across both parties. And the way that we've reframed issues throughout the years, I mean, part of it is this increasing polarization between the two-party system that has impacted how people view the environment, but it's also in how people shape environmental issues when they come up. So if we think about any like logging issues, it's always going to be trees versus jobs, because that's how it's been for every issue. And with this whole, you know, worldwide media, the issues aren't going to go away.
Well, I'm smiling, and I won't go too long, but there's a wonderful article by Bellamy Foster out of the University of Oregon who goes through the logging as an example, and basically says there's another actor behind the whole jobs versus environment framing, and that's the role of the corporate private timber industry. So as they're basically abandoning the state sustainable policies in the 1970s and just logging that, oh hi camera, a lot across the Pacific Northwest and going south and moving out, that put pressure on the Forest Service to basically log more to keep fiber going to the mills, which they basically had a social contract with for communities so they'd have jobs. But the corporations didn't want to be pinpointed in there, so it worked to almost divide and conquer. So there were lots of purposeful framings and campaigns and support to frame it as an environment versus worker jobs. And I think we really do have to appreciate we've made so many more advances in the last 20 years among this not being so polarized, but it's still out there. But you see now a purposeful framing. The Tester bill, jobs and restoration and forestry in one sentence, because there are a lot of complementary programs. Fire. That's a tremendously wonderful way to get a lot of multiple interests together because everybody's concerned about fire danger. Anyway, so we really have moved beyond what it
And
looked
there are
like
ways to
a decade
overlap
ago.
those values.
Absolutely.
National
Absolutely.
security is a way
Absolutely.
to wrap in environmentalism to people
Right.
who don't, who think that they are anti-environmental.
But there's a class issue there too that Robin made mention of that we just have to remember too. If the way you're defining environment and all these different agendas are responsive to a particular class and don't pay attention to all these other benefits, it will remain a class versus worker issue unless there's a real responsiveness. I mean, I could lecture my classes all the time, you should eat at the good food store and buy there. Well, if they're not going to be able to afford it, that's cruel. There's a class issue. And so money has a lot to do with it. It does.
And I think also that, I think absolutely right that there was a concerted campaign to sort of demonize or blame the environmental movement when in fact it was depletion of the resource and also competition from
Absolutely.
Canada
Restructuring
dumping
of the
logs,
timber
and there was
industry.
just
Exactly.
a global restructuring of
Right.
the economy of forestry. And so environmentalism and environmentalists got blamed, and it was a concerted effort to get support from workers and not blame the corporations and the regulators and others who were making a profit. And so it's a real environmentalists never had a response, and so we've since been alienated from labor, and it just repeats. It's like an allegory or something that just repeats itself. And you see the knee-jerk reaction still today with coal and we're going to lose jobs, and well wait a minute, there's not going to be demand for coal anyways,
Right.
because everyone's going to be switching to clean energy, and yet we have this entrenchment that we're against jobs. Well, wait a minute, and I think Bill Clinton was the first president that really pushed back about no, it's not jobs versus the environment, it's jobs and the environment. And so I think we need to be really good critical thinkers and tell our parents and our grandparents who may not think the way we do, right, about issues, that that's a false dichotomy, that we definitely need both, but we need to be willing to work for them too. We need to be willing to work for workers and to understand their issues and take how issues affect them, take them seriously, and be willing to work on their issues and support them. Otherwise, I don't think we're ever going to build those bridges. And so you can look it up, the Blue-Green Alliance. There's an organizations that are devoted to this kind of work. It's hard work, it's slow work, but so is sustainability.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to shift our focus away from the global perspective and a little more local. And let's go ahead and use the university as kind of a petri dish for this next question. Chris, if it's all right, can I ask you, first of all, what's the role of the Sustainable Campus Committee? And why was it established? And second of all, what's its role? And then I want to talk a little bit more about where we're going with it.
And Suzanne can fill in, she's the co-chair of the
Yes,
committee
of
as well.
So we've got.
Try and give an overview. Primarily, the SCC was formed. It's an advisory council to the president on sustainability issues.
Mhm.
So, any sort of sustainability issue comes up on campus, we get sent a memo that we need to talk about it. So that was the big thing this year with the divestment. So it's a sustainability issue on campus. The president doesn't have time to meet with students all the time, so the Sustainable Campus Committee takes over. We meet with the students, we understand the issue, and then we make recommendations to the president on what the next steps should be. So every year, we provide the president with recommendations for what sustainability initiatives need to move forward at the university. So whether it's energy efficiency projects, a new position on campus, solar panels, anything like that, we make the recommendations, and then it's up to the president to decide what happens next.
Okay, so we've got two sitting members of the SEC here, and of course, Suzanne Tillman is the chairman, and Dr. Saha at one point also sat on that committee. So,
Founded, were you founding?
No, I was not, but I do know a little bit of history to get into later.
okay, terrific. So what I want to ask is, at the last meeting, Dr. Tillman and Chris Olson both announced that they're exiting. So at this point, you can be super candid. And so what I really want to know is, what does the incoming board need to do to facilitate some of the changes that are necessary to meet the commitments made by this campus?
Well, unfortunately, so the nice thing about having a board that rotates is that you get representation from around campus, so students, faculty, staff, administration, different colleges or schools, which you need. But the difficulty is that you have new people coming on who really need to be educated in the charge of the committee, right? And so there's momentum. So you get new perspectives, because we might bring up topics that the president hasn't brought to our attention. So I believe green cleaning came up through SEC, not necessarily from top down. Right? So you bring in all these new perspectives, but then you have a lag because everyone needs to get caught back up on what's in charge, and then we have diversity of perspectives, and we don't agree on what the priorities should be, right? Which is probably the way we should handle these discussions. But if you really wanted to be efficient, you wouldn't turn over members. You'd be very efficient, but you might not be as effective.
I always thought dictatorship would be good. Green dictatorship.
Benign dictatorship.
Sort of joking, but not
Really?
Not really. As long as it was me.
All right.
So let me just follow up with this. So the SEC is currently struggling to meet their goals of carbon reduction.
The university.
The university is currently
So it's the university's
the
goals.
SEC is instrumental in recommending certain measures. So what do we as a campus need to do to help those along?
Well, I don't think we'd have much of a voice behind our measures if we didn't have students who cared. That's the truth.
Okay.
Right? I can't tell you how many times in the committee we've had topics come up that we think are very important, and of course administration has many pressures on it and many constituencies they have to answer, and of course we know we've had a contracting budgetary cycle, and so that's caused a lot of kind of focus on that immediate issue. But there's been many times that things have come up in the committee and we say, you know what we need, once we get this, and this figured out, we need students. You know, we need students,
So-
they have a voice that matters.
So a good old-fashioned student uprising?
Not uprising. Mobilizing.
Articulation.
Articulation,
Yes.
yes. I actually think,
But it is going to take student involvement.
absolutely.
Okay, terrific. Okay.
Robin, do you want to talk about?
Well,
You have
yeah, I
experience with
mean,
the SEC.
I guess I would say that it's challenging to have a committee make a decision. It's the usual thing, but and all the reasons, all the points you mentioned are very true. I guess it's important to remember it's only one committee. There's other voices on campus. It is sort of the official body that the president looks to for advice. So it's if you have an issue, it's good to get the SEC on board, but it doesn't mean that you don't have your own megaphone to talk about these issues. So student organizations, like UM Climate Action Now, Reinvest Montana. I mean, you guys have your own direct organizing you do and ways of and MontPIRG on issues too, have your ways of involving students and organizing them and getting your point across, lobbying, whatever it might be, or involving ASUM too in putting the official student stamp on issues. So right now, a lot of people are very concerned about meeting the climate commitments of the university, and it's just very difficult to do without now we realize because certain projects, big projects, couldn't move forward, the biomass plant and what was the other one? Wind. Now there's a solar one. I don't know what the status of that is. That we're left with needing to purchase carbon offsets, and that is controversial. And I think that it's just important to recognize that institutional change is slow in the university. Generally, it's a conservative. It's sort of actually a medieval model of governance at the university, and so all the lords and bishops and everyone else have to kind of weigh in. And it's the way it is that students do have a very big voice, and I have heard over and over again that if students don't support something, that the administration is very reluctant to move on something because you guys pay the bills. You're why we're here. And student opinion is very diverse. And so how do you marshal that? How do you determine what is the student voice? And I think there's ways to do it, but ultimately, it's institutional change is slow, and this whole point about you're saying there's turnover reminds me of what you were saying, Jill, about memory. And I think a lot of times student groups come in and they have an issue they work on for one semester, or they have people that are or a year, people who care about those issues a real lot, and then they graduate and there's maybe no one else to take and work on those. And I was an advisor for Students for Economic and Social Justice, which is for a long time moving the university to think about its contract with Coke, to also think about sourcing Grizz apparel and where products with the logo are made, and whether they're made in companies around the world that are environmentally and socially responsible. And the people that organized that kind of left, and there was this gap, and that group has sort of fizzled out. And so, what is the next group that's going to be like that? I hope there isn't one. I think the issues that students are working on are really, really important. CAN has been around a long time, and they're the group I see that needs to be stepping up and pushing on the climate issue. Students who are responsible for, largely for the university making that 2020 commitment to be carbon neutral. And so my role as a faculty member is to be the memory, to remind students about, that was your thing. The people who came before you worked on that. You come in and, what is your responsibility now to the community to kind of carry through with that? And so I see students stepping up to the plate over and over again. And I don't think we've hit the ball at the park yet, so we need to keep on that one. But I do think, I don't see it as a huge failure, and I think it's a lot of good work's been done, and we should stop and recognize all the good stuff that we're doing too. And there is a sustainability report card that Chris can tell you about. We shouldn't stop there and say, oh, well, let's pat ourselves on the back, we don't have more to do. But this issue of not meeting our climate commitment does concern me. I think students are key to it, so I'll stop there and maybe talk more about how to do that. But
in the sake of fairness, I'd like to skip my next two questions just because I think they've already been answered. And I would just like to move on to a bit of a call to action. So what is the best way to get student voices heard by the decision makers?
There's people here doing it. What do you guys think? What works?
That's a good segue. I'm ready. I think at this point we're ready to open it up to the audience. So what are Max?
Oh wait, are we supposed to be answering the question, or can we just end?
I think the question.
I didn't want to put you all on the spot.
So the question.
I feel like we've talked a lot. Maybe we do want to.
I have a question. You guys mentioned free rider problem, commons problem, so on. It seems that and proposed solutions like changing global culture or the Kyoto Protocol and so on. It seems that in this that with global governance such as it is, and with every state basically being able to be as sustainable or unsustainable as it pleases, it seems like maybe yes, it would be nice if everyone were to follow their obligations and be good adherents to all these international treaties and to listen to the United Nations when they say to be sustainable and so on. But it seems like with absolutely no way of ensuring that anyone else is doing it, the optimal strategy is then, rather than trying yourself to save the world single-handedly, it would seem like, you know, the solution would be just minimize damage to yourself, and so it would seem like that doesn't spell good things for the sustainability movement. I hope I'm articulating this clearly. If then, you know, it's you know, grab as much as you can while you still can, because no one else is going to work to save the world, and you're hurting yourself. I don't know, sort of the game theory, right? I don't know if I'm explaining myself clearly, but that's what I was thinking. That it's
Explain the tragedy of the common.
well, yes, but what does the
What the answer is,
yeah.
the solution?
I can try to answer real quickly. I don't have the answer, but I have a way to look at it. You talked about rational man, talked about game theory, so we'll put it in economic terms. Everyone has an individual utility function. And rational man would say that you can put it into money, right? But Douglas North won the Nobel Prize for this idea that cultures change, what we value changes. And so one way we can approach it is to maximize the individual utility function for people so that they get value from working towards resiliency or restoring what's depleted or environmental sustainability. And that requires culture and education. I mean, you saw the shift in our own country, what education did for young people to understand why the environment's important. And it's changed our whole economic system. Not as much as we would like, but it has made a change. So I think it's through culture and through value. That could be religion. You know, lots of religions talk about.
We convince every single state and every single person in those states that.
No, not every single person. Axelrod has this great book, a researcher. It's about cooperation, and it's using game theory. And so if you can get enough cooperators in the system, then the cooperators start to benefit from the interactions. It's just getting enough cooperators into the game theory system. But
Questions, please.
other answers, that's not an easy answer. That's just an academic
Well, the
answer.
question was,
I got a question. There's a lot of talk about, you know, oil industry and how to, I don't know, focus on other like geothermal and solar and wind, and use a multitude of alternative energies to supplement the oil energy. And everybody in here obviously has some type of skin in the game when it comes to you know, the future and what we want to see out of it. But I heard this story the other day. I mean, it talks about agriculture, so it's talking about, you know, and this is kind of a huge split in the environmental talks as well. Agriculture, you know, versus water, pretty much. I mean, so we have all this beef that we grow, and in California, you know, especially, they're in drought, and so, I mean, it's not, the oil industry does, the fracking industry specifically uses a lot of water, but the agriculture industry also uses, I mean, like 34 times the amount of water that the fracking industry does to grow beef.
Or almonds.
Yeah, or almonds, but, and then almonds supply like, so the beef that we grow supplies like 30% of Americans with beef. The almonds that we grow in California supply 80% of the world almonds. So I mean, there's a little bit of discrepancy there in percentage of what supplies what. So I mean, in these huge problems that we have, like actually pinpointing the problem and how do we multitask to take care of things that are, you know, seemingly like you don't think it connect cattle with it, you know, and especially if you're doing it responsibly, you know. But if we have CAPOs and whatnot, like that impacts things negatively, and then it's a power thing, and, you know, all about money. I mean, so it is about education, but obviously from like the attendance here, like it's not a priority, right? For, I mean, a lot of college students, like, and we would rather go to a football game than come to a lecture or a panel talk with a bunch of, you know, people who know what the hell's going on. You know, where are our, that's where we're at culturally, right? And we're market-based economy rather than resource-based economy. So, I mean, I don't know if we're not ready to do it now, you know, I mean, cultures change, but maybe this culture is too huge for what's going on right now, and then cultures that come, the changing culture that will come, I mean, will there be anything left? Will there be any equity left? So that's kind of just a question for you guys, and kind of absorbing what you guys are saying.
So again, the question, sum up the question again.
The question is yeah, there's a lot of questions in there. Where do we start, I guess? I mean, how do we fix it? That's a big thing,
Well, first of all, can I just say, just because people aren't here tonight, it doesn't mean they aren't interested.
Right, I mean, I'm glad we're filming.
Many students. I've been teaching a class called Environment and Development, variations of it for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started teaching that class, you would get 20 people. 3-4 times as many now. Dr. Saha can say the same thing for his classes. This topic has just swelled with interest.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Many people, and I think the first thing, I get the response from my students all the time because I take a very critical perspective, meaning we look underneath and we're trying to figure out not just what the newspaper and the media and others say are the diagnoses of the reasons, but critically try to figure out why are even environmental problems diagnosed the way they are. Maybe there's other ways to think about what those issues are, because how you diagnose what you think the problem is sets you up for what you think the solution is.
Yeah.
And a lot of times those things aren't working. So that's one thing, just to pay attention. And that's even, I'm throwing another harder thing back out, because a lot of students, they come, when they want to just move to solutions, I say, whoa, babe, how do you know that you think you understand? And then I'm going over to this place in Asia, and I'm going to help them figure out how to solve this intractable problem. And I think, have you ever gone there? Speak the language? So what makes you think, because you read a handful of books, there's first of all, where I'm getting at, we need a little humility.
Yeah.
These are complex issues, and I'll stand by my initial comments about we live in an extremely complex, multi-linked world. You can't predict. Our scientists are having a hard time figuring stuff out. So the whole command and control notions, including command and control sustainability. We know what's sustainable. Why can't we just get people to do it? I'd say step back a little bit. Be a little bit more humble. We really don't know exactly what's causing what. But I think a lot of people are working on it, they're taking classes in it, figuring out what little piece of it connects to them, back to this notion about working on something that's meaningful. And I think we're making a lot of progress. The only thing, my last point is, just be aware of when you're working on a symptom or when you're working on a cause, and what's actually a transformational project and what's just throwing Band-Aids. So when people come in and you get all pissed off because you see a little bottle there, come on. We should have coolers around and we all use them, but that isn't what's ruining the world right now. I mean, it's a symptom of it, but we got to keep a little perspective. Don't be as oppressed by every little thing we do as individuals, and try and keep a bigger picture, see where the bigger strings are happening, and just keep some perspective on that. And I think students are doing it. I mean, every year I'm amazed at how much more sophisticated my 400 level class in environment development. It's in the media. These topics are being talked about. So I see tremendous sophistication in thinking about it. My students are coming in and bringing me articles. Jill, look at what's happening in California. Blah, blah, blah. They don't know what to do with it, but they're talking about it, and they're realizing the reason the groundwater is going down in California may be linked to non-place-based functions, maybe decisions way out there in WTO on why or in Washington that we subsidize certain types of industrial agriculture. So it looks like it makes sense to grow stuff in California and send it around the world. They're making these links, and that's really sophisticated. So I feel very much like things are moving.
Then I got one more thing. Rather than like the Band-Aid, this is for a symptom. I think a major cause is consumption.
Totally.
Sure. Robin was saying, consumption drives so much of everything that you were just talking about.
Sure.
I mean, that would be like a cause rather than a symptom.
Sure, absolutely.
So taking care of that.
And what did one of our presidents say at one of our meetings, I think it was in Rio? The American lifestyle is not on the table for debate.
Yeah, well, and then we got 300 million Chinese moving into the middle class, that are gonna do things that replicate what we do.
Oh, you know how much pork production is being predicted, and where is it coming from? Though you maybe following the land grab movements in the Amazon or around the world?
Mhm.
Absolutely. But why shouldn't our lifestyle be on the table for discussion? Maybe we
Right.
need to have to give something up if we're telling farmers somewhere else, no, you can't grow your little crops anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, I think your questions are wonderful, and they show a lot of sophistication. I'm going to be happy to die in a couple decades, because I think we are leaving. No joke. I'm very, very impressed with our student populations and what you're learning and what you care about. So, all to it, get it done. As my son says, thanks a lot for leaving us such a mess. Thanks a lot.
Any other
A little
questions?
humor helps too.
I have a question. Kind of goes back to the money question, I guess, from before. A lot of kind of investing in this green technology and this green innovation is really, really expensive. And you already kind of talked about the difference in class and how that can be a real detriment for people. And in the net metering debates that were going on in the Capitol, one of the big things was only rich people are going to benefit if we expand net metering. So is there a way to kind of combat that sort of idea that green technology is only for rich people?
Yes, yes. I think the passage of the Medicaid expansion in Montana is a beautiful example of it. Right? It's using what Robin taught and connecting people who had the votes and who could reach their senators and representatives with reasons why they should care. Right? So the neighbors who need the help, the doctors who bring in a patient that say this patient cannot get any more care for this disease because they're not covered, right? I mean, it's exactly what Robin said. It's connecting in a way that, and I don't think, so Jill said that, people can see beneath the surface. They can also, we survived revolution by sensing lies, right? Falsehoods. So it's not about selling in a fake way, it's just making the connection to what's salient to them. And it's not always money. Green technology does not always benefit the wealthy.
Yeah, in this particular case, they're sort of right, but they're sort of wrong. So it's one of those things where you kind of, well, it's true that the people that do have solar panels on their houses are above the median income. Boom, there, he's right, okay? But just because it's that way, the reason it's that way is because we don't have neighborhood net metering.
Yeah.
So it's like the problem is not that it's going to benefit them. The problem is that we haven't created a law that will enable access to poor people or middle income or lower income people. So it's a very, and I think you have to be careful what argument you want to respond to, because a lot of times they use the argument that sounds good, that's going to shut you up, like, whatever it is. I'm sure you've all heard those arguments. And so do you really want to respond and try to nitpick that? Because you could be getting baited down a rabbit hole. And I think the whole environmental movement has had that happen by trying to fight the denial industry of climate change. Hey, wait a minute, let's not talk about the science anymore. How about we forget about that? How about we say that, let me rephrase that. Let's not make the center of the debate about the science. Let's talk about transforming to a clean energy economy, or something like what Naomi Klein talks about. Instead of being against something, instead of getting into the argument about the details and the uncertainties that we can't know very well, even economists will argue about and debate for end on end what are the costs of not addressing climate change. Is it the Stearns report, is it this way or is it that way? So let's not get, I think it's important though to have technical skills and analysis, don't get me wrong, but there's always going to be different analyses and different assumptions. And so so that's one thing, is don't get caught in analysis paralysis, but focus on maybe, and not, instead of being against something, being for something. I think that people are also really drawn to a positive vision, and we have it, but we get lost in it. We focus on coal, we focus on dirty oil and fracking and this and that. Well, I think people are really attracted to the idea of a clean energy economy. It's interesting, if you look at the public opinion polls around in Montana, the majority of people favor more coal development. Boom, that's affecting President Engstrom. That's affecting whether we can divest. But 90% of people somewhat, or no, very much so, or somewhat support renewable energy development. 90% versus a little over 50. So you can say things like more people in Montana support renewable energy, or have a campaign around renewable energy. Try to get labor on board because they're going to see they're losing jobs. So you need to think strategically. You know, you really need to think about what you're asking for is going to be, what the counter arguments are going to be, and then how other people are going to respond to that. And I think sometimes the positive vision is maybe a way to go. But people will get attracted to something that other people are jumping on board too. So, anyways, that's just some thoughts on going back to net metering in the legislature.
Can I make one quick question?
Yes, please.
I spent last year, at least half of it, living in Switzerland as a faculty exchange person at the University of Bern. And I was amazed the difference in everyday life. First of all, we didn't need a car. Public transportation took us everywhere. Even literally right next to a ski area. Boom. Second, I was amazed, first of all, at the cost of stuff. Everyone hears how expensive it is. But then I heard what the minimum wage was. And it basically would be about $50,000 a year here. So there is, back to your point about the freeloader, people mutually agree on certain values, then they put rules and regulations in. And so they have a very high economy, but they have rules for corporations. And while I was there was even a vote whether or not corporations, and in Switzerland, remember, you have some of the highest global pharmaceuticals, what the percentage of income disparity should be between the highest paid CEO and the lowest. Now, it didn't pass, but the fact is that's what they were discussing. Back to my forestry work. Lots of little towns sitting in the middle of valleys, just like Missoula, had amazing biomass heaters that were generating enough heat for their downtown public services and then out. And I kept thinking, why can they do it and we can't? And in fact, my husband and I both were writing lots of little editorials for the Missoulian. Why can they do it and we can't do it here? Same kind of valley, issues with air pollution, right? They're a little ahead of us, so the technology for cleanly producing it. But a lot of it, of course, had to do with what you're used to, and people there have been used to seeing trees cut and burned and used and cut. I mean, they have been using trees as a renewable resource in a way that all we've seen in our country is a large-scale corporate, and then the U.S. Forest Service is overcutting, and then we just go back and forth to extremes rather than an intermediate scale logging, which, whatever you want to call it at this point, sustainable, resilient, has the features of a system that if you have a little bit of a market change or if you have a climate change, because of the way that it's organized, it can withstand it and keep going. And that was really interesting to me, and it made me realize we could be doing it here. But back to the point, does everybody agree? What are the values? And then how do you put those values into rules, regulations, practices that have durability as well?
Okay. Any other questions?
Is it all right if I go again? I heard talk of bait. I'll throw out a piece of bait. There was mention earlier of this idea that we have this, and not necessarily like that all interests will homogenize, but that if you can make the case in a way that speaks to something that people care about. And I want to know how you make that case to someone who we heard mention of that there are people who, if we do move to a more sustainable economy, will lose the jobs they currently have or will be affected in negative ways. So how do you make the case to someone who it's not a matter of education, they are actually being harmed by these?
Well, they're being harmed right now by the boom and bust cycles of the oil development because of the price. You know, how many people are coming home from the Balkan now? So you tell them, well, look, you know, if we have a energy economy that's more stable, you have a job for 30 years rather than having a job for 1 year and then having to come back home. So, you know, I think that might require some regulation of the energy prices. I don't know, but then the danger of that is that they'll do price supports for oil, and you know they've already done that before. And so I guess what I'm saying is that it's a difficult. I think what you're saying is difficult when people are already being affected and losing their jobs, and so I think there's something attractive about not having that boom and bust cycle that comes from using non-renewable resources. And you know, we have here Missoula College too that's training people in energy technology. So there are programs for retraining workers that you know we had in the forest industry, right?
We need to really be committed to a diverse economic base so that we don't have these hyper focuses on a few activities. And that requires commitment and investment.
Throw it out there. I'm going to give everyone else a chance, but so I was in a conversation the other day about hunting with some folks on Facebook, and you know, of course, there's some people, you know, there's people who are just very, very, you know, don't hunt ever, shouldn't kill animals. And my point of view was, and we're of course, you know, that led into a conversation about wolves and, you know, snow leopards in the Himalayas and things like that. And my question would be, how do you, kind of the converse of talking to someone, you know, who might not consider themselves environmentalists, how do you convince someone to kind of come to the table when they, you know, my point to them was, you know, how do you go to a rancher who's, you know, been dealing with losing their stock to wolves, or how do you go even to a, you know, pastoral, you know, subsistence farmer somewhere who's been losing their, you know, who their options are, you know, that the way they see it to survive is to go out and expand their herding lands and cut down trees and, you know, do things that are really in the long-term environmentally destructive, but in the short term feeds their family. How do you engage with people who are very, very far, I guess, to the one side of the environmental issue?
I wish we were in my class today. Seth Wilson, who runs the Wildlife Committee for the Blackfoot Challenge, talked exactly about, over the last 25 years, all their different programs, both for wolves and for grizzly bears. First principle, you don't come in as an outsider conservation agenda. You meet people where they are, right where they are. You recognize and you figure out, first of all, is it fear or what's really happening? To make a long story short, they figured out, let me just use bears, 85% of all the bear conflicts were happening in riparian areas. Using real data from the Fish and Wildlife Park and some other that 7 others collected. They spent a lot of time trying to not just respond to people's fears and statements, but what's really happening out there. They figured out that the bears were largely attracted to boneyards where we're throwing out the carcasses, and they started to recognize the rangers had real concerns, and then they worked through them. So they have a variety of programs now. They reduced the bear conflicts by 90% by just literally having a mobile truck go around at certain times of the year and remove those bear attractants, the carcasses. They've done a variety of different things that actually respond to the real concerns. They have range riders for wolves, sharing information with the ranchers where the wolves are. Just a whole variety of things that actually meet people where their concerns are, their livelihood, their personal security, their safety, their community. And they've made amazing progress. And it isn't just all about just value-changing education. We understand your value. You want to protect your cows and your kids. But they have figured out some amazing stuff to resolve conflicts. And a lot of it has been through ongoing meetings and discussions until you figure out what these different concerns are. And then having, back to your point, figuring out also the appropriate technology and the cost. Who bears the cost? I mean, ranchers have tried all sorts of fencing. If you can't even afford, or if you don't know about the technologies, you're not going to do it. So there's been subsidizing of this mobile truck that's been picking up all the carcasses. Why should the rancher, as they would say, assume the private cost? Back to your point, and also Dr. Saha's, you're only going to get a piece of it, right? So they had the state get involved and they raised monies, and so it's been largely subsidized, but it's been tremendously successful.
All right, we got time for one more question.
I guess I'm looking for advice. What, as members of student groups, which I think a lot of us are, if you're a student, whether it be Climate Action Hour, Reinvest, or even MontPIRG, do you have any advice for not only activism, but just like, you know, positive, tangible change like we're all striving for? Even like campus specific, do you think we can improve on something, or is there a direction we could look on to head to?
My advice is I guess
this is the takeaway.
More, well, oh boy, you're putting that. Hope someone else will have a takeaway then. I guess I don't have an issue that I see needing to be worked on. I think issues that students have identified are important and good ones, and I think the point is that they need sustain. I meant this point before, that institutional change is slow, and that moving an institution is hard work, and it requires sustained attention. Attention more than one semester, and often more than 1 year, and that even that change that you get will not be enough. So it may take decades of change, but it's happening, and I see really a lot of positive things that have happened on this campus over the last just 10 years or 12 years. We didn't used to have a sustainable campus committee. That has provided a forum for all sorts of people to get involved and to be talking about issues and to be researching and to be getting support from their issues. So I think that sustaining effort over time also requires institutionalizing knowledge. So the things that Caitlin is doing with Reinvest, when she leaves, who's going to know that history? How is that going to be built on? When I was a student organizer, when I was an undergrad, I was very concerned with my group that we helped start be around in 5 years, and it was. And I think part of it was thinking about leadership, thinking about who's coming up behind you, and leaving something there. And I think MontPIRG provides such a great institutional knowledge because they've been training and giving students the opportunity for leadership. And so that's an anchor for me here. Other groups are harder to sustain over years and years, but I'm starting to see that happen. So don't forget that us faculty are part of that institutional memory too. We know the struggles you're going through. We advise you, hopefully well, and not too much, and that we remember hopefully what other students have tried and done. And so use us, ask questions of people who have, this is great that you all came here to want to know more. And so I would say just keep asking questions about what works and try things out. See what works, learn from experience, and then try something else. That's all I have, I guess.
I would really like to hear what Chris has to say.
Okay.
I was going to say what Robin said.
Oh.
Because I get student groups coming in all the time asking me, like, what has been done before? What can they build off of? And so within groups, that's one thing that needs to happen. There needs to be this passing of the torch, this passing of this knowledge, this institutional knowledge of what needs to get done. All you have to do is take back the tap. Take back the tap is something that's happened. It happens for a year. The person who's really into it, they leave, nothing happens. Then a few more years later, we get someone else who comes in. Now they're really into it, but then they'll graduate and it hasn't been passed on. And so with these campaigns, we have to recognize that they're on a long cycle. Like the Coke contract is on an 8-year cycle. It's going to take a long time to ban bottled water on campus if that's what we want. So there needs to be that that push to recruit people throughout your time here. When you graduate, you need to make sure it's in someone's hand, otherwise it's going to disappear. And all that work you spent the 4 years here doing, it's not going to result in anything. And so making sure you're very clear on what your outcome is, I think will help you kind of with that and with making sure that that knowledge is continually passed on, because you want to see that outcome happening. I think in terms of student groups, another thing that's important is like thinking outside the box in terms of recruitment. There's a lot of untapped potential here on campus. When I think of the sustainability groups on campus, so many of them are dominated by forestry and environmental studies and climate change studies and all of this. And there's tons of untapped potential in, you know, public
Business
health,
school.
business.
Yeah, pharmacy.
Yeah, the pharmacy school. Like, I have the data on the students that opt out of the sustainability fee, and the lowest opt-out rate is in physical therapy. So these physical therapy students are supporting sustainability on campus, and I've never met any of them. And I don't see them at any of these sustainability clubs, but they're obviously this resource that's available.
Which group has the highest opt-out rate? Which major?
I think we can probably guess.
But there's a lot of untapped resources on campus for student groups, and so thinking outside the box in terms of your recruitment, I think, can be really beneficial.
Note to self, more class reps and
Write it down.
Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on that, actually. So my name is Lagan Todd. I'm a co-instructor at Missoula College, and Brian's taking a class that I'm teaching there, which is on building energy efficiency. And when Brian, I didn't know if I was going to be able to make it tonight, and Brian had sent out an email and said if you have any questions or thoughts, send them my way, and maybe they'll come up in the discussion. What I offered was that, that it would benefit us all to have a little bit more collaboration between students at Missoula College, students at the University of Montana, collaborating with the faculty, staff, and even outside contractors to make energy conservation projects happen on campus. And so, outside of teaching this course, which is just a small chunk of my time, my career is in commissioning, engineering or building commissioning, and I've done a fair bit of energy conservation work on this campus. And so I know that there are buildings on this campus that use sometimes 2 times as much energy as they should, given the time they're occupied. And a lot of the kind of work that needs to be done there is not, to be honest, very exciting work. And when we look at the built environment and energy conservation and efficiency, oftentimes among those of us who are really interested and passionate, even our attention gets drawn to the things like renewable energy systems and photovoltaics and wind power and things like that. But there's a ton of work to be done that's a lot less glamorous. It involves calibrating pneumatic thermostats and insulating steam pipes and things like that, that are the things that would bring these buildings' energy consumption down to where they should be. And this is, a lot of us are also, we don't have an awareness of the impact of that, because we think of energy use in a building, maybe the most tangible thing or accessible thing for us is what we purchase for energy in our home. And there are buildings on this campus that use $10,000 worth of energy a month, right? So it's just tremendous amounts of energy compared to what you might be familiar with. So a few people can make a huge impact. And so when I sent the email out to say that, I think we need more of this. And I don't think I phrased it quite the right way, because I said it needs to be better. And Brian Kearns, I don't know if any of you know Brian Kearns, but Brian Kearns is an excellent resource on this campus and an expert in his field having to do with energy and energy use in buildings. And he replied back to say, well, look, we've actually had, here's a list of really successful projects we've had where students have collaborated with the facilities department on campus to make some things happen. So I would just remind you, I'd be remiss to not bring it up before I leave, that those opportunities are definitely there. If you have any interest in energy, conservation in the built environment, talk to people in the facilities department here, or faculty members or whoever who can help get you aligned in ways that you could do some of that work. And if you have opportunities to go overseas and think big picture, because I really appreciate the comments about the big picture stuff too, take them, because I'd feel guilty if you were crawling around, auditing steam pipes under Longson Center when you could be overseas somewhere doing something a little bit more exciting maybe, but it is valid work, and there's a lot to be done.
Thank you so much for mentioning that.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you. I would, before I invite folks to come up and greet our panel on the way to the buffet, please. I would just like, first of all, thank the representatives of ASUM, MontPIRG. I see you've got Reinvest Montana. I would really like to thank the audience, even though there's not a football game going on right now, making the trip down here. And then, of course, please join me in thanking our panel. So please come up, just chat.
Stand.
And bring the